Hello, everyone. Welcome to your first of several mini lectures. This lecture is going to be on Latin American stereotypes that are prevalent throughout film. And we're going to look at several different examples throughout the course of this lecture. So, jumping in, stereotypes are attempts to normalize or oversimplify a society or culture based on the actions of only some of the members of that society. Stereotyping takes place both from inside and outside of a society or culture. For these reasons, cultures and groups that find themselves the object of stereotyping often deem the results to be offensive because stereotyping tends to focus on the ridiculous, the negative, sensational, and outrageous elements of the culture in question. Stereotyping usually involves both ethnocentrism, the idea that one's own culture and way of life is superior to that of another, and the practice of intolerance, treating people in other societies as inferior. And they are likely to categorize individuals into what I like to call neat little boxes. Now, this Fritos Chips commercial from the 1960s is an excellent example of some common Mexican stereotypes, including the Mexican bandit and silly accents.
I heard you want to be a frito bandido like me. You do? Then you must sing the bandido song. Let's sing together. You just follow the bouncing Fritos corn chips bag. Ay, 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 ay. I am the frito bandido. Hey, I like Fritos corn chips. I love them, I do. I want Fritos corn chips. I'll get them from you. Ay, 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 ay. Oh, I am the frito bandito. Give me fritos corn chips and I'll be your friend. The frito bandito, you must not offend. Now, boys and girls, you are frito banditos too. You sing the frito bandito song and you loco for crunchy fritos corn chips. That's nice. Munch, munch, munchy bunchy fritos corn chips.
Now, this quote right here is also a disturbing example of how stereotyping an entire culture or region can have a negative repercussion on that region. It states, "It seems unlikely that there could be any other region of the earth in which nature and human behavior could have combined to produce a more unhappy and hapless background for the conduct of human life than in Latin America." United States Ambassador George F. Kennan made this derogatory comment in 1950 after visiting several Latin American countries. His report contains harsh statements, accusations, and comparisons between Latin America and the United States, where he finds Latin America wanting in every way. His visit seems to have had a negative effect on his perceptions of Latin America as a whole, even though he acknowledged that his views were, quote, shots in the dark, based mainly on instinct and general experience. But it is these kind of judgments that are exactly what people who desire to learn more about the history of Latin America need to avoid. George F. Kennan's attitudes about the people of Latin America were not new, and in 1950, these opinions had existed since the beginnings of relations with people of North America and South America. Now, stereotypes about Latin Americans tend to focus on several key associations, such as race, behavior, and morality. Racially, Latin Americans are frequently portrayed as dark skinned and dark haired. They are often depicted behaviorally as violent, passionate, and devious, and are occasionally illustrated to have low or no morals. And sometimes they are even found to completely undermine the moral fabric of society in general. These include characters such as bandits, prostitutes, buffoons, cheaters, and male and female seducers. Also contributing to Latin American stereotypes were the perceptions of early travelers, among whom Latin Americans appeared to be more comfortable living in nature instead of manipulating and controlling nature as Americans and Europeans did. Now, this notion of the Latin American, quote, tropics characterized the people of Latin America as primitive natives with a lazy or backwards way of life compared to that of Americans or Europeans. And this photo from the early 20th century really depicts a stereotypical sleepy Mexican discussing his pottery business, with the quote hinting at the backwards and lazy lifestyle of Mexicans as a whole. Now, this begs the question, how and where did stereotypes of Latin American culture emerge? Well, in the early years of the 19th century, we saw the first long-term interactions between the Spanish colonies in Latin America and the United States. They had experienced brief exchanges prior to the turn of the century, but after 1800, these relations increased. In 1803, the U.S. purchased the Louisiana Territory, or the Louisiana Purchase, from France, which gave the U.S. and Latin America their first long-distance border in North America. This border ran from the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Canadian border, encompassing the future U.S. states between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains, including Colorado. In 1823, U.S. President James Monroe issued his famous Monroe Doctrine, and President Teddy Roosevelt would later expand on this notion with the Roosevelt Corollary that stated that the U.S. would intervene in Latin American affairs whenever necessary to maintain economic and political stability in the Western Hemisphere. Now, in the early 20th century, the U.S. began to deal heavily in Latin American affairs. Stereotypes were born that were based on a small percentage of the population, and this incorrectly painted Latin American culture with broad brushstrokes, when in reality Latin America was a microcosm of diversity. Now, in the popular films Once Upon a Time in Mexico, The Three Amigos, and Bananas, which we'll all talk about and see clips of in just a second, they are all outlandish and excessive in their portrayal of Latin American stereotypes. These films are all entertaining in their own right, but play upon preconceived notions that American audiences have acquired through the media. They all contain multiple stereotypical characters in settings that are easy to see and are accessible to criticism and analysis. The purpose of including these films here isn't so much to show real history, but to illustrate the practice of stereotyping in a very obvious manner. Now, the first film we're going to look at here, Once Upon a Time in Mexico from 2003, is the story of an individual named Mariachi, which in itself is a stereotype. Because Mariachi is a very accomplished guitar player and a gunslinger. This purpose of the film is totally pure entertainment set against a Mexican backdrop. It is full of stereotypes from start to finish, from the quintessential Mexican gunman to the American CIA agent to the over-the-top action and violence. At one point in the film, a gunfight takes place in a church, pausing momentarily to let an old praying woman exit the gun battle. This scene plays on the notion that Mexicans are extremely religious, but also extremely fierce. While there is absolutely no historical significance to the film at all, it does serve in an academic sense to prepare students of Latin American history through film to observe, notice, and deconstruct stereotypes in film. It should be noted also that Once Upon a Time in Mexico is the third film in the Mexico trilogy directed by Robert Rodriguez, and all of these films are quite entertaining if you want to watch them in your own time. So here is the trailer for Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and do notice some of the Mexican stereotypes that are even very apparent within this trailer.
I never heard of him. Who? man you recommended?
The man is a myth, a legend. And if he's still living, he's the one you want. I make you nervous?
No.
A renegade agent playing both sides.
I work for the CIA. Mexico's my beat, and I'm walking it.
Out to find the outlaw who became a legend.
I need you to kill the man. He's being paid to kill the president. So why me? Well, frankly, because you've got nothing to live for.
What's wrong?
Everything. Oh, yeah. It might get a wee bit dangerous.
What do you mean,
Now,
You want to know the secret to winning? One has to rig the game. This is a setup.
he's about to discover that legends
I'm here for my time. I didn't think you'd ever come back for this thing. Neither did I.
play by their own rules.
And I guess I have no choice but to kill you all. Don't get messy. You dig it?
I can take it.
Once upon a time in Mexico.
Are you still standing? Still.
And I should also note that Once Upon a Time in Mexico prominently features the actor William Dafoe, or actually Willem Dafoe, excuse me, excellent actor who is in much of the movie appearing in brownface. And this kind of harks back to early stereotypes in film where they didn't want to cast Mexicans or people of Latin American descent, so they painted well-known white actors instead. In the sense of this film, I think it was done for more of a joke on the part of Robert Rodriguez, the director, but nonetheless, there's also that stereotype that appears in here as well. Now, the next film that we're going to discuss is the very silly 1986 film Three Amigos that is also full of popular Latin American stereotypes. The film takes place in Mexico in 1916 and includes several blatant stereotypes, including Mexicans sitting on horses drinking tequila in front of Cantina del Borracho, the bar of the drunk, an antagonist named El Guapo, whose men are very dirty and don traditional Mexican bandit attire, a birthday party that is full of piñatas, and a hacienda that is packed full of Mexican prostitutes. Here's the 1986 trailer to Three Amigos. And again, try to notice some of these Mexican and Latin American stereotypes that are present throughout the trailer.
That's right! The Three Amigos. They were the biggest stars of their day.
The Three Amigos are history.
But that was yesterday.
Look, boys, I know show business. Something always turns up. Telegram for the Three Amigos. Come with me where moonbeams paint the sky.
Who are you?
The Three Amigos! Arriba!
I like this guy. They are funny guys. Just kill one of them.
Steve Martin, Chevy Chase.
You have anything besides Mexican food?
Martin Short. The Three Amigos.
Throw down your gun! Not you, Dusty! Sorry!
You're so brave.
Whoa, Horseman!
Three Amigos.
I'll come back one day.
Why?
Now, the final example that I'm going to use that depicts Latin American stereotypes is the film Bananas, directed and written by Woody Allen in 1971. In this film, stereotypes play on the apprehensions and fears of Americans in the 1960s and 70s regarding Fidel Castro's regime in Cuba and the perceived worldwide proliferation of communism. This scene makes fun of Latin American politics while at the same time spoofing American reaction to Latin American affairs. Essentially, this clip reduces the assassinations that have taken place in Latin America to the level of a spectator sport for American audiences. Featured in this clip is a prominent newscaster, sportscaster at the time, named Howard Cosell. And you'll notice, too, that all of this is reminiscent of Cuba in the 1950s and 60s, when Castro's resistance drove Cuban dictator Batista from power after mounting a long and often very violent resistance campaign in the Cuban mountains. And we'll later on in the semester watch a film on the Cuban Revolution and discuss the revolution at length. But here's the clip from Bananas making fun of U.S. assassination attempts at stopping Fidel Castro in Cuba.
Good afternoon. Wide World of Sports is in the little republic of San Marcos, where we're going to bring you a live, on-the-spot assassination. They're going to kill the president of this lovely Latin American country and replace him with a military dictatorship. And everybody is about as excited and tense as can be. The weather on this Sunday afternoon is perfect, and if you've just joined us, we've seen a series of colorful riots that started with the traditional bombing of the American embassy, a ritual as old as the city itself. Following that, the leader of the labor union, Julio Diaz, was dragged from his home and beaten by an angry mob. It was one of the most exciting spectacles I've ever seen. We'll probably have a videotape replay of that later on. All around, there are colorful flags and hats. And now the moment we've been waiting for is here. Everyone is getting quiet. The president is going to leave his office and walk down the steps of the palace. For that, we're going down on the playing area. Take it away, Howard.
This is tremendous, Don, just tremendous. The atmosphere heavy, uncertain, overtones of ugliness. A reminder in a way of how it was in March of 1964 at Miami Beach, when Clay met Liston for the first time and nobody was certain how it would turn out. The crowd is tense. They've been here since 10 this morning. And I think I see the door beginning to open. El Presidente may be coming out. Door opens. It's he. It's El Presidente. And down. It's over. It's all over for El Presidente. This reporter is going to get to him, if he can, through this mob for one last word before he expires. As you can see, this crowd is not to be trifled with. They're in a frenzy. They're trying to get over to El Presidente, even as I am trying to do now. Would you people let me through? This is American television. American television, please. Let me through. We're getting through now. Here we are. Here we are, sir. Sir, you've been shot. When did you know it was all over? Fascist. Dictators. Well, of course you're upset, and that's understandable under the circumstances. I guess now you'll have to announce your retirement. Well, good luck to you, sir. Good luck to you. And now, if you folks will bear with me for a moment, I'm going to try and get in a word with the new dictator of San Marcos. That's assuming I can get through this noisy and demonstrative crowd. I wonder if you people would let me through. I see the general off in the distance, a new dictator talking to one of his men. Excuse me, sir. General, congratulations, General Emilio Molina Vargas. And General, a word from you, if you will, sir, for our viewers.
For many years, I have waited for this day, but now I am the state.
You may say that, sir, but many important diplomats contend that you remain the most hated man in the state.
I will shut down the newspapers. I will train my soldiers. We'll find the rebels.
The rebels may be in the form of democratic guerrilla factions off in the hills.
No, sir. We'll find them. Don't worry.
Good luck to you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well, you've heard it with your own eyes. Now we're going to have to see what the future brings. Right now, from the little dictatorship of San Marcos in Latin America, let's go back to Jim McLean in our studios in New York.
So as you can see, that movie Bananas from 1971 holds several stereotypes regarding Latin American politics, especially surrounding the process of revolution, often facilitated by outside interests like the United States, and then the inserting of military dictatorships, obviously simplifying it in terms of American sportscasting. A funny movie if anybody is inclined to go watch that one.
Good app.
But all of these three films that we just discussed, as well as the documentary Real Engine that you are viewing this week, portray outsized examples of often outlandish racial stereotyping. These stereotypes perpetuate commonly held assumptions about Latin American societies, and they can and often do color the way people view unfamiliar groups. But when viewed for what they are, as attempts to standardize, and simplify a certain culture, viewers can move beyond the portrayal of preposterous, undesirable, and even scandalous elements of a culture, and uncover a more accurate portrayal of the Latin American people and the institutions within Latin America. So in film, it is very important to recognize the racial stereotypes of the past that have influenced contemporary notions of indigenous cultures and Latin American people, and often still appear somewhat less blatantly in movies today. So that's going to conclude your first mini lecture. You are going to have at least one mini lecture to view every week. They will most often be posted on Sunday, giving you the entire week to view the mini lecture at your convenience. I do suggest that as you're watching these lectures, you take good notes that you can reference later, because these lectures are fair game for future pop quizzes and reading quizzes. Also, if for some reason I talked too much or was going too fast throughout these lectures, please feel free to go back and pause pause the audio so you can write down any of the text that I may have breezed by. Also, this will be posted in Canvas, and I will leave it there for the duration of the semester, so you are able to watch it again at your convenience. Thanks, guys, and I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone over the course of this semester.